The lights on the stage gleamed a little too brightly, bouncing off Jimmy Kimmel's trademark smirk. He leaned into the microphone with the casual swagger of a man who thought he owned the room. His joke landed sharp, coated in sarcasm, the kind of jab meant to get cheap laughs at someone else's expense. The audience chuckled politely, some nervously, others eagerly feeding off the arrogance radiating from the host's chair. But before the laughter could settle, Pam Bondi leaned forward. Her voice cut clean through the haze, crisp and steady, the kind of tone that makes a crowd freeze mid-breath. "Jimmy," she said, pausing just long enough to let the silence wrap around her words, "maybe you should explain to them why you're laughing at all." The room shifted. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. The smirk on Jimmy's face faltered, almost imperceptibly, but enough for the cameras to catch. A few people gasped, as if they sensed the air itself had changed. Kimmel tried to recover, chuckling, tossing out another line as if to wave off her interruption, but Pam didn't budge. Her eyes locked on him with the calm intensity of someone who had waited for this exact moment. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need theatrics. Her presence alone commanded the silence. The laughter died completely. What replaced it was something heavier, more electric. The audience leaned forward, sensing a break in the script, the unexpected twist that makes history. Pam's words landed not as a soundbite, but as a challenge. She wasn't playing the part of a guest anymore. She was seizing the narrative, ripping the spotlight from his grip and holding it steady on him. And in that stillness, Jimmy's face changed. The flush of confidence drained just enough for the cameras to catch a shade of pale, the realization flickering that this wasn't the segment he had planned, and he wasn't the one in control anymore. The audience, once restless with laughter, now sat pinned by silence, waiting for the next strike, and what she revealed next left Kimmel visibly shaken. The silence hung for a beat longer than anyone expected. In television, moments like this are dangerous. Silence is supposed to be filled, covered, buried beneath jokes or applause. But here, the silence became a character of its own. It was heavy, charged, almost defiant. Jimmy shifted in his seat, leaning back, forcing a smile that looked more like a shield than an expression. Pam didn't let him escape. She leaned forward, calm but unyielding, and spoke in a measured voice that carried across the room. "This isn't about a punchline, Jimmy. This is about the way you use that stage." The audience tensed, unsure of where this was going. Some whispered, others held their breath. The cameras caught it all, every flicker of discomfort on Jimmy's face, every ounce of confidence radiating from Pam's composure, and then she set the stakes higher. "You think it's funny to laugh at people's pain, to build your brand on sneers and cheap shots. But the truth is, millions of Americans are tired of being mocked for who they are, where they come from, and what they believe. They're tired of being told they don't belong." The words landed like a verdict. In that moment, it wasn't just a celebrity exchange on late-night television. It was the crystallization of something much larger, a cultural clash that had been simmering beneath the surface of America for years. Jimmy tried to interject, but the crowd's reaction beat him to it. A murmur rippled through the seats, a low rumble of recognition. They knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about identity, dignity, and respect. Pam pressed on. "Every time you use that platform to ridicule people, you send a message that their struggles are a joke. But the truth, Jimmy, is that their stories are not punchlines. They are battles. They are sacrifices. They are the very fabric of this country." The tension in the room sharpened, like a wire pulled taut. Viewers at home would later describe feeling goosebumps, as if they too were sitting in that studio, witnessing something unravel that could never be rolled back. For Jimmy, the stakes were personal. His credibility, his control over the crowd, his carefully crafted image as the witty insider. For Pam, the stakes were larger. to voice what so many had felt but never said aloud, to pierce through the veil of comedy that too often masked cruelty. This wasn't just a television spat. This was about who gets to define Americanness, who holds the right to laugh and who is forced to swallow the sting of that laughter. And just when it seemed she had made her point, Pam paused, her eyes narrowing with a calm fire. But this isn't only about tonight, Jimmy. This is about the choices you've made for years, and the truth, your truth, is about to come out. The audience gasped again, louder this time. They could feel the pivot. The laughter from earlier felt distant now, irrelevant. What hung in the air was anticipation, even fear, because the next words out of her mouth changed everything. To understand the magnitude of what was happening on that stage, you had to look at the man across from Pam Bondi. Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just a late-night host delivering jokes for ratings. He was a carefully cultivated persona, polished over decades, built on a combination of charm, wit, and a fearless edge. On television, he was untouchable. In the public eye, he was the master of ridicule, the king of clever comebacks. But behind the laughter, there was a history that few were willing to scrutinize, and tonight, that history was about to catch. Kimmel's rise had been meteoric. He started as a stand-up comic, sharp, irreverent, fearless in his jabs at authority. His humor was edgy, sometimes cruel, often aimed at the vulnerable or those who dared to challenge the status quo. Each joke, each punchline chipped away at the respect others might have commanded, leaving a trail of bruised egos and silent grudges. Audiences laughed because it was entertaining. Critics sometimes winced, but his popularity grew. In the world of television, controversy was currency, and Jimmy spent lavishly. Over the years, Kimmel's comedic empire expanded, and so did his reputation for merciless satire. Celebrities learned to fear him, politicians learned to prepare, and ordinary Americans learned to either laugh along or be mocked publicly. He cultivated a sense of untouchability, the kind that makes people forget there is a human being behind the punchlines, someone who could be called to account. Arrogance quietly settled in, a subtle confidence that the stage belonged to him and that anyone who challenged him would be reduced to fodder for laughter. But that wasn't the whole story. Critics had long whispered about the darker corners of his career. There were moments when jokes crossed the line, targets humiliated beyond humor, personal tragedies exploited for ratings, and a casual dismissal of the consequences. Each incident had been cataloged, remembered by those who felt mocked, ignored by those who cheered. The pattern was consistent: charisma as armor, arrogance as shield, and humor as weapon. On camera, Jimmy was smooth. Off camera, he had become even more cautious. Yet in his arrogance, he believed he was untouchable. The audience didn't always see the careful calculations, the endless rehearsals, the protective walls built around his image. What they did see was confidence, a relentless grin, and the energy of someone who thrived on the spotlight. Tonight, however, those walls were beginning to crumble. Every joke he had ever used as a shield was powerless in the face of someone who refused to be intimidated. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She didn't need to raise her voice or shout. Her presence alone was enough to illuminate the cracks in his armor. The room, once a playground for his mockery, had transformed into a crucible, and he was at the center. The irony was palpable. The man who had spent years laughing at others now felt the weight of scrutiny, the sting of the audience's collective gaze. It wasn't rage he felt. It was something subtler, more corrosive, the dawning recognition that charm and wit could only carry him so far when confronted by unwavering truth. Every smirk, every practiced pause, every attempt to deflect fell short. The confidence that had seemed invincible moments ago was now tinged with doubt. The camera caught it all: pale skin, tight jaw, the twitch of a forced smile. Jimmy Kimmel, once untouchable, was suddenly human, and the audience could feel it. because, in the quiet before the storm, one truth became undeniable. Arrogance is fragile, and tonight, that fragility was about to be exposed in full. Pam Bondi's story didn't begin under bright lights or with the roar of a studio audience. It began in hallways of public service, in courtrooms filled with tension, in communities where the stakes weren't ratings or applause but real lives. Real justice. From the earliest days of her career, she carried herself with a quiet determination, a sense that every decision mattered, every action left a mark. Unlike the polished sheen of celebrity, her credibility was forged in the trenches of law and policy, built on discipline, integrity, and a relentless commitment to her principles. Growing up, Pam had been no stranger to challenges. Her family instilled in her a belief in perseverance and responsibility. She understood early on that the world could be unforgiving, that those who tried to exploit the weak or the marginalized often went unchecked. That awareness planted a seed, a sense of duty that would define her career. It wasn't about personal gain or fame. It was about ensuring that the system worked for everyone, even when the spotlight refused to shine on them. Her rise in the legal world was deliberate. Each case she took, each policy she advocated for, reflected a deep understanding of justice and the human consequences behind every law. She became known not for grandstanding, but for effectiveness, for getting results where others hesitated or faltered. Her record was one of substance, and while some criticized her methods or decisions, there was no denying her commitment. She was a professional who had earned the respect of colleagues, adversaries, and the communities she served. When she entered the political stage, her focus didn't shift. Her audience had grown, but her mission remained the same. Pam Bondi brought with her the same precision, the same careful reasoning, and the same unwavering moral compass. Yet, unlike the calculated performance of someone like Jimmy Kimmel, her public persona was rooted in authenticity. There were no scripts to conceal discomfort, no jokes to mask intent. She spoke with the weight of experience and the clarity of someone who had navigated the complexity of power and responsibility firsthand. Her strength, however, wasn't merely in her career achievements. It was in her ability to remain composed, under pressure, to meet arrogance with dignity, to confront entitlement without yielding to intimidation. Years of courtroom battles, political negotiations, and public scrutiny had honed her instincts. She had learned that true power lies not in noise or spectacle, but in the quiet authority of preparation, the confidence born of competence, and the courage to stand alone if necessary. By the time she faced Jimmy Kimmel, Pam Bondi was more than a public figure. She was a symbol. She represented the many who had been dismissed, ridiculed, or overlooked. She embodied a voice that refused to be silenced. The contrast was stark. Here was a woman whose authority stemmed from earned respect, mettle, and integrity, facing a man whose influence was built on laughter, charm, and the fleeting currency of celebrity. Her presence on stage was a culmination of all these years, every courtroom, every policy fight, every judgment call, converging into this precise moment. She didn't need theatrics because her credibility carried its own gravity. Every eye in the room, every camera lens, every viewer at home could feel it. This wasn't a typical interview, and this wasn't just another night of entertainment. This was the collision of integrity and ego, of substance and spectacle. And yet, beneath the composed exterior, there was anticipation, because she knew the stage wasn't just about confrontation. It was about truth, about exposing pretense, about demonstrating that dignity and preparation could silence arrogance. Every subtle gesture, every measured word, every calm breath was a testament to her readiness for the challenge ahead. Pam's story, in essence, was the story of anyone who had fought to be seen, to be respected, to rise above derision and dismissal. And now, all that history, all that experience, all that preparation was about to meet its ultimate test. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and she was ready. Because what she was about to do would not only expose Kimmel, it would redefine the audience's understanding of courage, poise, and the power of standing firm in one's truth. The tension in the room had reached a palpable pitch, a silent hum vibrating through the audience like electricity waiting to arc. Jimmy Kimmel tried to regain his footing, tossing out another quip with the practiced ease of a man who had built a career on deflecting discomfort with humor. But this time, the laughter that usually followed his lines was hesitant, fragmented. The crowd was uncertain, caught between amusement and awe, sensing that something larger than comedy was unfolding before their eyes. Pam Bondi remained immovable, her composure a stark contrast to the flailing energy across the stage. She didn't respond immediately, letting his words hang in the air like smoke, giving the audience time to absorb the gravity of the situation. Every pause, every glance, every tilt of her head amplified the tension. She didn't need to interrupt yet. The weight of her presence was already a counterweight to his arrogance. Jimmy leaned forward, attempting charm and intimidation simultaneously, a calculated smile masking the first hints of unease. "Oh, come on, Pam," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Don't take it so seriously. It's just a little fun," the audience murmured. Some shifted in their seats. The laughter that had been rehearsed in their minds dissipated into an uneasy stillness. They were witnessing a battle far more intense than a scripted joke. Every eye in the room seemed to track the subtle war unfolding, the smirk, the tightening jaw, the poised gaze that refused to yield. Pam finally spoke, her words deliberate, controlled, and piercing. "Fun?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "Is it fun when people are reduced to stereotypes? When truth is twisted into punchlines? When influence is wielded to mock rather than illuminate?" The silence deepened, and for the first time, Jimmy's practiced rhythm faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but the air itself seemed to hold him back. The audience leaned in collectively, the murmurs replaced by a heavy anticipation. They could feel that the rules of engagement had shifted. What had begun as entertainment had become confrontation, and the balance of power was tilting. Pam's presence was relentless, yet calm. Every point she made landed like a hammer against the stage, echoing beyond the studio walls. Each phrase revealed a deeper understanding of accountability, of respect, and of the consequences of public influence. Jimmy's responses grew shorter, less confident, his usual veneer of wit starting to crack. The audience sensed it instinctively. The person who had controlled the narrative for years was now on the defensive. As tension escalated, the cameras caught subtle tells, pale cheeks, a twitching smile, a momentary glance away. Jimmy was visibly rattled, and yet the show went on, the lights bright, the microphones hot. Pam had not raised her voice, had not resorted to theatrics, and yet she had seized the narrative completely. The room felt suspended in that fragile balance, each word a potential tipping point. Then came the moment that tightened every chest in the room, a pointed question delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed nothing but strategy, nothing but truth. The audience gasped collectively, sensing that this was no ordinary debate. Jimmy's eyes widened slightly, his smirk faltering, and the realization hit him. This confrontation was not about winning a laugh. This confrontation was about accountability, about dignity, about the stark choice between arrogance and integrity. And then, before anyone could predict the next move, Pam paused, the tiniest flicker of anticipation in her gaze, signaling the storm that was about to break, the moment where the calm hero would strike and the world would hold its breath. The air in the studio seemed to thicken, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in the silence. Jimmy Kimmel's smile was no longer a shield. It was fragile, trembling at the edges. He had weathered interviews, late-night segments, and social media storms, but nothing had prepared him for this. Pam Bondi was no ordinary guest. She was the embodiment of resolve, of precision, of authority that needed no applause. And now, the moment, had arrived. Pam leaned slightly forward, the microphone capturing every syllable as if the room itself had bent to her voice. She didn't yell. She didn't gesture wildly. She spoke slowly, deliberately, each word measured, for maximum impact. "Jimmy," she began, "all your jokes, all your laughter at others' expense, what do they really accomplish?" Her gaze locked on him, steady and unflinching. Do they lift anyone up? Do they illuminate truth? Or do they only distract from it, covering arrogance with applause? The audience reacted instantly. A collective murmur ran through the room, half gasp, half whisper, as though the very walls were acknowledging the weight of her words. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably, trying to recover with a nervous chuckle, a weak deflection. But Pam's calm presence was magnetic, drawing attention away from his faltering bravado and focusing it entirely on the truth she carried. Pam's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in intensity. She began to recount specifics, precise, moments where Jimmy's jokes had crossed lines, where ridicule had replaced reflection. She reminded the room of instances that had caused real harm, highlighting the hypocrisy of wielding humor as armor. Each anecdote was delivered with clarity, balance, and a subtle moral authority that made it impossible to dismiss. The audience felt every word, feeling both outrage and validation, as if someone had finally voiced what they had long suspected but never dared to articulate. The tension mounted. Jimmy attempted another quip, a flicker of the old persona, but it landed flat. Pam's counterattack didn't rely on theatrics. It relied on evidence, on careful dismantling, on moral clarity. Every pause was strategic, every phrase deliberate, creating suspense, anticipation, and undeniable weight. The silence between her points made the audience lean in, straining for every word, sensing the gravity of the moment. As she continued, the cracks in Jimmy's composure widened. His smirk faded, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. He tried to regain control, but his attempts to redirect or charm were met with unwavering calm and piercing focus. Pam methodically exposed the contradictions in his words and actions, juxtaposing his public image with a record that was less than flattering. Each revelation was delivered without malice but with precision, and each struck with the force of undeniable truth. The crowd's reaction intensified. Gasps, whispered affirmations, even a few murmurs of approval echoed through the studio. Social media feeds would later explode with snippets. Viewers replaying every moment as hashtags trended, clips went viral, and commentators scrambled to describe what they had witnessed. Every person in the room, whether seated on stage, behind the camera, or in the audience, could feel the shift in power. The narrative had changed, and Jimmy Kimmel, the once untouchable host, was at the center of it, exposed and vulnerable. Pam's final blow was not loud or dramatic. It was surgical. She delivered the line that would reverberate beyond the studio, a statement that reframed the confrontation entirely. "You can laugh at others, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "But laughter built on mockery is hollow. It cracks under scrutiny, it falters when truth enters the room, and it cannot withstand integrity. Tonight, the joke is not on them. It's on you." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that is both heavy and electric, where every spectator knew they were witnessing a turning point. Jimmy's face had gone pale, his confidence evaporating under the weight of her calm precision. He opened his mouth, perhaps to respond, but no words could reverse the effect. The audience felt it collectively. The fall of arrogance, the rise of integrity, and the unmistakable moment where truth had claimed the stage. Even after her final word, Pam didn't need to gloat or repeat herself. The reaction had already erupted. Cameras panned across the room, capturing the disbelief, the awe, the silent respect. Social media would later replay the moment in fragments, captions screaming about the confrontation that no one saw coming. Commentators would describe it as a watershed, a moment when the power dynamics of the room shifted irreversibly. Jimmy Kimmel, the master of late-night humor, sat stunned, realizing that his charm, his wit, and his carefully constructed persona were powerless against preparation, truth, and composure. Pam Bondi had done more than rebut a joke. She had dismantled a legacy of mockery with quiet authority. She had transformed a late-night segment into a lesson on accountability, integrity, and the enduring power of dignity. And as the audience held its collective breath, one truth became undeniable. When preparation meets courage, when dignity faces arrogance, the outcome is not just inevitable, it is unforgettable. The moment Pam Bondi's words landed, the studio didn't just react, it ignited. A collective gasp had evolved into a tangible energy that seemed to pulse through the audience, cameras, and even the air itself. Viewers at home would later replay the footage countless times, sharing snippets across platforms, dissecting every pause, every glance, every flicker of expression on Jimmy Kimmel's pale face. The confrontation had transcended entertainment. It had become a cultural event, a defining spectacle that left audiences stunned and buzzing with anticipation. Social media erupted within seconds. Hashtags like Pam takes the stage and Kimmel exposed and truth over mockery began trending, gaining traction not just nationally, but globally. Clips of her calm yet devastating takedown were retweeted by millions. Comments poured in from people who saw themselves in her words, who had long felt dismissed or ridiculed, and finally witnessed someone articulate their frustration with dignity and power. Memes emerged almost instantly. Pam's piercing gaze, juxtaposed with Jimmy's faltering smirk, became a symbol of courage confronting arrogance, a visual shorthand for anyone who had ever stood up against mockery. News outlets scrambled to cover the aftermath. Talk shows, morning news programs, and political commentary channels dissected the confrontation with a mixture of shock and admiration. Analysts replayed the moments, frame by frame, pointing out subtle tells in Jimmy's body, language, the twitch of his jaw, the quick blink, the involuntary pallor that betrayed his faltering confidence. Commentators debated the broader significance, framing it as a rare instance where celebrity humor collided with real accountability, and the latter won, leaving viewers to reconsider the dynamics of power in media. Celebrities weighed in as, well, some offering praise, others defensive commentary, but all acknowledging the seismic impact. Those who had long been silent or complicit in the culture of ridicule began to reconsider their platforms, realizing the vulnerability exposed when arrogance meets prepared integrity. The studio audience's reactions became the defining images. In social feeds, wide eyes, mouths slightly agape, a room collectively witnessing the unraveling of a persona they thought invincible. The ripple effect extended beyond entertainment. Communities that had felt marginalized saw her confrontation as validation, a moment of recognition for voices that had been overlooked. Progressive thinkers, immigrant communities, and advocates for dignity in public discourse celebrated her composure, her courage, and her ability to confront power without sacrificing professionalism or humanity. It wasn't just a victory over a single individual. It was a symbolic triumph over the structures that enable mockery, marginalization, and arrogance. Jimmy Kimmel, meanwhile, became the center of conversation for all the wrong reasons. His usual post-interview charm was ineffective in the face of viral scrutiny. Media outlets highlighted the tension, the contrast, the very human cracks in his polished image. Interviews attempted to salvage his reputation, but the narrative had already shifted. People were captivated not by his attempted humor, but by the undeniable impact of Pam's confrontation. His pallor, his hesitation, his faltering confidence, these were replayed again and again, each clip reinforcing the story. Arrogance had met accountability, and it had faltered. Everywhere, the story resonated. The confrontation inspired debates about media responsibility, about the power of public figures, and about the courage it takes to stand up in the face of ridicule. The audience didn't just consume the moment. They felt it, internalized it, and shared it, creating a cultural ripple that extended far beyond the studio. And as millions watched, commented, and reflected, one truth became evident. The impact of courage and dignity cannot be measured in immediate applause alone. It reverberates, ignites conversation, and inspires reflection, leaving a mark far deeper than any punchline ever could. The world had witnessed a clash of personas, of integrity, against arrogance, and the aftershocks were only beginning. And so, the confrontation that started as a simple late-night segment became a defining moment of courage, dignity, and truth. Pam Bondi had shown the world that composure and preparation could dismantle arrogance, that integrity could shine brighter than sarcasm, and that standing firm in one's convictions could inspire millions. The audience had witnessed more than a debate. They had witnessed a lesson in accountability, a celebration of resilience, and a reminder that truth carries weight that no punchline can overshadow. For viewers at home, this was not just entertainment. It was a call to recognize the value of standing up for what matters, of speaking boldly without sacrificing composure, and of confronting injustice or mockery with clarity and confidence. Every social media share, every conversation sparked, and every reflection posted online became part of a larger ripple, a movement that validated the voices of those who had long felt overlooked or silenced. So what can we take away from this moment? That influence is a responsibility, that words can uplift or wound, and that courage is contagious. Just as Pam Bondi transformed a stage meant for laughter into a lesson in integrity, each of us has the power to confront challenges, speak truth, and stand with dignity in the face of arrogance. If this story inspired you, share it. Let others see that courage and integrity are not just ideals. They are actionable, powerful, and transformative. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that validate, uplift, and challenge, and join a community that celebrates resilience, pride, and the triumph of truth over mockery. Because moments like this don't just pass, they resonate. They remind us all that standing firm in your truth is not only powerful, it's necessary.